My guest today is author T. Martin Bennett, who served as vice president of a nonprofit company with Keith Green, a leading recording artist. Now, he later co-founded a manufacturing company that grew to over 100 employees, 20 million in sales per year, and won the National Small Business Administration Entrepreneur of the Year award. But in 2005, T. Martin Bennett stumbled across rare information about Mitsuo Fuchida, the Japanese pilot who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, his novel, Wounded Tiger, the incredible true story of that Japanese pilot who did indeed lead that attack on Pearl Harbor, and his amazing journey to redemption. Now, this third edition of the book contains updated material plus 300 never-before-seen photos. It is meticulously researched history that reads like a fast-paced, action-packed novel. But this true story may be about three people, but more importantly, it's about tragedy, triumph, and transformation. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome author of Wounded Tiger, T. Martin Bennett, to the show. Welcome.
Ward, thanks so much for having me on your program.
Well, it's an honor, and wow, your novel was an incredible read, and I absolutely loved it. Now, for those who have not read your book yet, of Wounded Tiger, can you kind of tell us what it's about?
Sure, Wounded Tiger is the true story of the pilot who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, whose life was changed by an American prisoner and by a girl he never met. If this were a fictional story, it probably wouldn't work too well because it's just too far out to be believed. But the fact that it's true is really, it makes it a compelling and interesting story, and the ending is unpredictable and rewarding. So it's an amazing true story.
Well, you spent 3 years doing the research for your book. What astounded you the most in all the research that you compiled for this book?
Well, there's a lot of, whatever you want to call it, serendipitous or providential events that happen in this story that when you come across, you think, how can that be? The way that a young lady connected with Mitsuo Fuchida, separated by thousands of miles. I mean, the odds of this happening were millions to one, and yet it did happen, and it did ultimately change his life. So I would say the serendipitous things that happen in this story, another one that I don't like giveaways, but this is just a small giveaway, and that is that uh, there's a man named Jake DeShazer who was a pilot, or actually he was a bombardier on the Doolittle raid, the first counterattack of the Americans against Japan, and his plane ran out of fuel over occupied Japan, and he had to jump out of the plane in the pitch black night raining over occupied China, and he thought he could certainly die, and some people on the Doolittle raid did die that evening. So he jumps out of the plane, Ward, and then across the Pacific Ocean, his mother wakes up, elbows her husband, and says, "I feel like I need to pray for Jake. I feel like I'm falling through the air." And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, oh, is this real? I mean, I don't want to put anything in my book that's fake. And I read it. It was the story. It said, "I am the praying mother of Jake DeShazer." So then I got onto Google Earth and I looked up the date and the time and the locations that I thought, could it be dark in China and dark in Oregon across the Pacific Ocean at the same time? Because if not, this story is not real. And it turned out it was totally legit. But I didn't trust my calculations, so I did it two more times and it kept coming up the same. So she literally woke up when her son jumped out into the air and she told her husband, "I feel like I'm falling through the air and I need to pray for her son." She needed to pray for her son, Jake. So those kinds of things that happen, you think, wow, this is what is going on in this story. I'm interested. Where is it going to go next?
Yeah, that tells me that there's a strong tie to the Holy Spirit in that type of connection. And, you have three stories going on at the same time in this book.
Right.
You have Mitsuo, you have Jake, and then you have
Mm.
Peggy. Did it feel like you were writing three books at the same time?
Well, yeah, basically you're taking these three plot lines and you're shuffling together and you're going from one storyline to the next. And what I had to do, Ward, was I built a spreadsheet so I could put all the events in a timeline. And the spreadsheet's about 2 feet high and about 7 feet wide. I built this before I even started the script on the screenplay, and then later used the screenplay as the template for the book. But I knew these three stories, they ran parallel with each other, and we'd hop from one story to the next. But the Covels, as you mentioned, so they're the third plot line to this story, and that's about 20%. They're highly educated teachers from Chicago or the Chicago area. They went to Japan. They were married. Their kids were grown up, born in Japan, spoke Japanese, and they, besides being Christians, they went to the poorest of the poor, and they really loved the people of Japan, the culture, and everything. But they felt they had to get out of there because they were ramping up for war, and Americans were not welcome. So the parents went to the Philippines, and then they got a job working at a university, and they sent their kids back home. So that's part of the element of these three stories that are completely separated. But the beauty is, I've had many people tell me when they read the book, they couldn't wait to see what's happening with the other people in these separate plot lines as they slowly develop. And one of the driving questions is, how do these things come together? And I think now that you've read the book, the answer is you will never guess what happens. It's completely out of left field. And for me, I love a story that I can't predict because it gets predictable. I disengage, I check out. You're a movie guy, you know what happens when it's predictable. This is very unpredictable all the way up to the very end. You're thinking, I cannot believe what I'm reading.
And it's as I was going through the book, and I love the way where some chapters they're long, they're not, but then they're not long. They could be a page or a page and a half, because I loved how you did this timeline, and it helped me to follow that timeline because when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened, I was like, okay, because of your timeline, it helped me to realize, okay, here's this story that keeps going. When is America going to get its revenge? And
Mm-hmm.
but I was so taken back because I've read about the attack on Pearl Harbor. You are
Mm-hmm.
the only one that I know of that it's like when I saw the movie Das Boot, the original German version with the
I've seen it.
subtitles, not the remake, the
Okay.
original. I saw the original. And to look at a war from the enemy's side is very compelling because there's human life on both sides, regardless what your nationality is, what your beliefs are. But here you are, you show and help us look through the eyes of Japanese commanders, Japanese fighter pilots. The photographs from their view was shocking, and even the words of them themselves saying, "Wow, we surprised the Americans. They were completely unaware. They were completely surprised." And it kind of made me wonder, why were we so unprepared? But your book brought out elements that I've never read before when it came to Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the fun of it. But I remember as a high school student asking teachers, why did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor? What were they trying to do? They're trying to take over the United States, fight us in war. This doesn't make any sense. Teachers didn't know. And almost every book I read when I was researching this story on the American side, it was basically, we're going to beat up the dirty Japs and we're going to conquer them. And as I thought, well, as a storyteller, I need to understand not just what is happening, but why is it happening? And that took like years of research to understand these things. But once I got a handle of it, I thought, okay, now I understand what's going on. How can I boil down the essence of this conflict in a way that's understandable and compelling while weaving this story of redemption, which is really the payoff for this whole thing, and seeing how that happens. So I'm really happy with the way it came together as a script. And this is the third version of the book. There have been thousands of changes done since I wrote the first edition. And of course, the hundreds of photos. One thing that's very cool that you saw in this third edition of Wounded Tiger is on page 143 is, as far as I know, the only reproduction of the telegraph message that says Tora, Tora, Tora on it. I didn't even know it existed because I'd never heard of it or seen it in any books or even referred to. I had a Japanese national researcher who worked with me. She found it in a museum. They don't even allow you to take pictures of it, but we got permission to put it in the book, and I think that's just fantastic. It makes the story that much more real.
I mean, what kind of thoughts went through your mind when you saw the photographs, let's just say, of Pearl Harbor taken by Japanese fighter pilots?
Yeah, it was quite amazing. But what it does is, if you don't have a picture, you have your own imagination. But when you have a picture, then your imagination can flesh it out. And you thought, man, this was really something else. They flew for hundreds of miles over the ocean, and if you have engine trouble, you just die. And they were being shot at by the Americans. And as a note, which you know from the book itself, it's a tiny giveaway. But when Fuchida got back to his aircraft carrier, he was the lead pilot. So after he dropped his bomb, he still circled Pearl Harbor so he could take notes of what was happening. And his plane was fired at and hit at least twice by shrapnel. So when he got, there's any aircraft fire that fires at that shrapnel. So after he landed, he's debriefing the pilots. His engineer comes and says, "Hey, I want to show you something. It's like really important." And he shows him that he's got one of those frayed wires in his plane just hanging by a thread. And like, if that thing popped, you would have been dead. And of course, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Ward. I mean, so many things like this. Now, in his mind, he said, the gods are with us. Something and someone is looking out for me. And I'd say, well, that's sort of true, but he didn't know the name of that God, capital G. And later on, he was in Hiroshima. He gets a phone call. He leaves, the city's blown to pieces. And he starts thinking, why am I not dead? And I think it's a great question. But what drove him, of course, was when he saw Jake DeShazer's life and in a tract, and Peggy Covell, whose life we heard from his engineer. He wanted to know, why would you not look for revenge for your enemies? Why would you love your enemies? Where does this love come from? And that's a really good question. I think anybody who asks that question is asking a really good question. Why would people love their enemies? Why does God love us? So that's really what drove him. He wasn't interested in religion, God, Christianity, none of that. He just wanted to find out, why would someone love their enemies? And when he found out, he thought, wow. And that's so the title of the book, Wounded Tiger, is really Fuchida's story. And of course, but your audience probably doesn't, that Tora, Tora, Tora means tiger, tiger, tiger. And Fuchida is that wounded tiger. And a wounded tiger can't achieve its gifts and callings of beauty and power. You see these tigers in a zoo, you're like, wow, that's a gorgeous creature. But a wounded tiger can never reach his potential. And Fuchida was trying to reach his potential through fleshly, earthly, prideful means. And it just led to the destruction of his own life and his country. But that's when God comes in and shows him what his true calling is. And that's when he becomes that healed, conquering, a triumphant tiger. And that's his story, but it's really everyone's story. We all are wounded tigers, more or less, at some point, and we need something else outside of ourselves to allow us to be who we're supposed to be. And that's when we come into our gifts and callings and the joy of living.
Absolutely. I was before they did the attack on Pearl Harbor. Fujida's, I was surprised about him and the others in the Japanese military that they really seemed like they worshiped the emperor. I mean, as if, people who are called to, we're all called to worship the Lord, but boy, they were worshiping a man as if he was God. And they
Well,
worshiped, him, Japan to be a superpower. And he was staunch in that belief. And it just proved to me that God can change anybody.
he can. And he was arguably among the most unlikely people in the Pacific War to embrace the God of his enemies. And they did have a emperor worship. They don't consider the emperor as um, omnipotent like the God of the Bible, but they consider him to be endowed with authority from the gods, and they did follow his lead. So at the end of the war, when the military commanders wanted to fight to the last man because their pride wouldn't allow them to surrender, but the emperor said, "No, I'm not going to sacrifice the whole country for this. We're done." And when he said that, they all followed him, including Fuchida, and that was really a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I found that your book, Wounded Tiger, it's written very differently than the other nonfiction World War II books. How did you go about making it different?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's a big question because when I wrote the script, you know that a script is written in the present tense. John walks to the door. It's all present tense. When you translate it to a nonfiction book, it becomes a little dry. It's like they did these things, they said this, it's all you're observing. And I thought, I really don't like that format. So back years ago, Truman Capote did a book called In Cold Blood. And this is a true story, but he told it in the format of fiction. So it's dynamic and happening now, but it's true. So that's called a nonfiction novel. There's another book called Killer Angels by Michael Shara, Shaara. It's a very famous book, an award-winning book, and it's about the Battle of Gettysburg, but it's also a nonfiction novel. And I thought, that's exactly what I need to do with this book, because I don't like the dry format of nonfiction, but it's not. I'm not fabricating anything. And you saw in the introduction to the book, I have a page and a half of all the research that went into this and having experts vet everything in here. So what I say in that introduction is the essence of every scene in this story is true, and that is a true fact. However, I wrote it in the format of fiction, so the net result is it reads like a novel because it is a novel, only it's true.
Wow. Now, where did you find these new 300 photographs?
All right. So what happened was Mitsuo Fuchida had two children, a daughter and a son. The son passed away about 5 years ago. Now, as I've been working on this over the past 19 years, believe it or not, when I first came across this story, I contacted him to get information, but he just wouldn't even talk to me. The daughter, though, Miyako, was willing to talk with me, and she lives up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I asked her, how do I get in touch with your brother? She said he won't talk to anybody. He won't give any information out. So I thought, well, nothing I can do about that. However, when he passed away, he bequeathed all his archives of his father's photographs, letters, documents, all kinds of things, maps to Stanford. So when I saw that, I thought, I'm going to go to Stanford. So a couple of years ago, I went out there. I spent a couple of days. I went through every single photo, every letter, every piece of paper they had in there. And I called out the best of the best. And that's in this third edition of the book. There's some really beautiful pictures, high resolution pictures, and it really does humanize this story. I think your experience, what I've had people tell me is, Martin, they said, as I read this book, I just felt like I was there while I was reading it. What were your feelings when you read the book, Ward?
You wrote it in a way that I was able as a reader
Mm-hmm.
to feel all the emotions from all the characters, from Vegeta to Jake and to Peggy and her family, even Jake's comrades. You brought that emotion from each one. And as a reader, I felt each one. I felt their fear, especially when when Jake and the rest of them were standing in line. I think there was 24 of them, and the
Oh,
commander came to each one asking
yeah.
yay or nay when it came to the secret mission. And
Hmm.
Jake's the last one, and he blurted out yes, because I think that, and when I read just that, I thought that happens because you're standing in front of authority.
Right.
23 already said yes. Then it's almost well, it's military peer pressure, but
Exactly.
but it was a
The fact,
normal human reaction.
but the fact was, God had a purpose and a plan here. And he had to go through that hellhole of being in prison to bring him. He had to be in the deepest darkness before he could find the light. He was living a happy go lucky military life. That was never going to lead to the success and purpose that God had for him. But yeah, so let me ask you another question. I know you're the interviewer, but I'm curious, and that is, did you ever find yourself moved emotionally? And if so, what scene was that? And describe it without giving things away.
Yeah, boy, you're good. You need to be in this chair. Wow.
This,
I think, boy, without giving things away, uh, the scene with the Covels um, standing before the Japanese soldiers. Uh,
okay. In Hopevale, in the
yeah,
Philippines.
being accused of maybe helping the guerrillas,
Mm-hmm.
feeling the emotion that, hey, we're just missionaries. We love the Japanese people. and all of those things didn't matter. Um, that was tough. That was tough to swallow. Uh, the the mock trials of the Doolittle
Mm-hmm.
Raiders with
Mm-hmm.
Jake and his other comrades, and how that ended. I mean, I even felt the pain of Jake when the guard caught his ankle in the
Oh,
door.
right.
So
Yes.
the way you wrote this book, every little nuance, if people take time to read every page, you feel every element of the story.
Well, I'm glad that I wanted to be that way. I remember reading when I was studying screenwriting years ago and storytelling, they said the difference between a novel and a nonfiction book is that nonfiction goes to your head, but fiction is dramatic. And if it doesn't affect your heart or your emotions, it's not a good book. And I also read, and I think this is very true, if the story you're telling doesn't affect you emotionally, it won't affect anyone else. And even though I know this story quite well, I've been working on it for so long, if I'm editing a page, I find myself with tears in my eyes, just like, golly, this is just an unbelievable story. So I don't consider myself the author of the story. I consider myself the delivery man. It's like I'm trying to collect all this information, put it together, and deliver it to other people and say, listen, these things really happen, and I think you should know this story because I think it's going to encourage you in some way. I don't care who you are, you're going to get something good out of this story.
Yeah, you actually became the steward of their stories.
Yeah,
And
so I feel the responsibility in that. And I want it to
yeah,
be accurate. I don't want to, I didn't take artistic license to put in crazy things that didn't happen. I did the exact opposite. I tried to find the crazy things that happen and say, how do I tell this in such a way that people are going to understand it?
well, one of the areas of the book that I really had to sit there and look at the contrast. You showed the contrast of our American soldiers who were treated as prisoners of war by the Japanese versus how the Japanese soldiers were treated as prisoners of war by the Americans. The contrast was very, very stark, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was for sure. And of course, Fuchida was angry about the war crimes trials, and he had to go to these war crimes trials. And I have one of those scenes in the story. And this is just a interesting footnote. I've asked people, "What did you find the most interesting scene in the book?" And I expected to hear like five mountaintops, but it wasn't. It's all over the map. But one guy said the court scene of Fuchida's friend put on trial was the most moving scene for him. But this was true, and it made him angry because he felt it was just victor's justice. They won, so they're condemning us and killing us. But he said the Americans probably tortured Japanese just the same as we did. That was his assumption. But when he found out it was totally different, he was like, huh, there is a big difference in culture for sure.
You even had the photographs of the Japanese internment camps in
Yes.
California.
Mm.
And what is so striking about those photos and the story that you tell? When you look at the photo, everything is clean, everything is bright, it doesn't look like a prison. And then to read the story of Peggy, and when Fujita found out how she was excellent at speaking Japanese,
Yeah.
and she was speaking to those Japanese soldiers, he struggled trying to figure out, why did she act that way? Meaning, she held nothing against the Japanese soldiers.
Right. So to fill in your audience, Peggy Cavell was in upstate New York. She heard about terrible things happening in the Pacific and terrible things happening and persecution of Americans in the Philippines. And she thought, what is the most loving thing I can do for the Japanese people who I deeply love? So she volunteered to go to an internment camp, and this was in Colorado, to serve the Japanese people. But you have to understand the climate in the United States was they hated the Japanese people. They had sons and fathers and brothers who were killed and mowed down by the tens of thousands all across the Pacific. And there were some people in the United States saying, kill all the Japanese in Japan, just wipe the island clean and start over. We hate them. So Peggy thought, what can I do that would show the love of God to these people? And she went and volunteered. And she was, warned that, hey, people are not going to respect you for doing this, but she didn't care. While she was in Colorado at an internment camp, the word was sent out from a hospital, a military hospital that had prisoners of war, both Americans, Germans, and Japanese, and they need volunteers. Well, she spoke Japanese and she was Red Cross qualified, so she volunteered to go out to Salt Lake City, Utah, and she served these Japanese prisoners of war. And in their words, they said it was like an angel, like a brother, loving them, and just anything she could do for them, she would do it, as you well know in the story. And without giving away too much here, when she finally revealed why she was there, they were horrified. Why are you loving us? Why are you treating us so well when your family has not been treated well by the Japanese? They were confounded, but they couldn't deny that she was loving them with unconditional agape love, and they never experienced anything like that before. So when Fuchida's engineer, Kanagasaki, ends up being repatriated back to Japan, he wanted to find out all the dirt on how he was treated like an animal by the Americans. He didn't hear that news, but what he did hear was there's this girl who speaks Japanese who loves her enemies, even though they're terrible to the Americans. And he thought, okay, why would you do that? It's a great twist, and it really is engaging. And I've had people from pastors to a head of an atheist club have pretty much the same response to the story of, wow, this is a very compelling, interesting, and rewarding story.
When I was following Fuchida's life, and you, excuse me, and you gave that little story when he came back from Pearl Harbor, with that one little thread of wire that kept him between life and death.
Mm-hmm.
But there were other elements of his life that were the same, that came up as the same. when the Americans dropped the atomic bomb, so he went to Hiroshima. I was surprised, and I'm thinking, okay, God, you have your hand on this man for a reason, because everybody that went with him ended up with radiation sickness, but he did not.
Correct.
That was astonishing.
It is astonishing. And I have a guy who works with me on this book has two different, degrees. He's high-level scientist. And he said, Martin, we need to make sure this is accurate because people are going to rake you over the coals if this is false. So, yeah, there is the radioactive fallout that fell across, the city. And for real, it is poisonous and it is deadly. Now, it does dissipate over time and rainwater washes it away, etc. But the day after the bomb was dropped, it was not a healthy place to be. Plus, all the smoke of all that was going up, the city was burning for days because of the atomic bomb. And definitely, people who were with him on that search party were dying of radiation sickness. Hair falling out, gums bleeding, patches on their skin, and they were dying. He had no symptoms whatsoever, zero. Now, he's not the only person that happened to, but it was very, very rare. And it was just one of those many things that, in a trial, they have what they refer to as a preponderance of evidence. And it was this gathering preponderance of evidence of someone is looking out for me. Who is this person?
When with Fuchida's story, and I love the way that you wrote this as a novel, when he had heard about Hiroshima, he was dumbfounded, just like the other commanders were like, a single blast? There's no way. And how did they, what was this thing? And he called it basically, I guess he called it with the devil's bomb or something. And
yeah.
And I'm trying to stand in his shoes thinking, nobody knew. And I loved you had that one little blip in the book about Oppenheimer. Of all the coincidences between the movie and your book now, I thought that was kind of cool. But Fuchida and the rest of them were literally trying to grasp. But then he makes that comment. An atomic bomb? And he goes, the Americans aren't that smart. And there's no way they're going to surprise us, basically. But then that one line in the book, I just stared at it. He's like, harnessing the power of the sun, and you brought it to Earth. And I was like, oh my gosh. And even Oppenheimer said this, he's like, what have I done?
Right? Highly destructive. But it's the beauty of what comes out of the ashes of Hiroshima in Fuchida's life and in Japan itself. I mean, we're now, our countries are best friends. We love the Japanese people, the culture, electronics, automobiles, everything else, but they still don't have that supernatural spark of why are they here? What's the purpose of life? And I hope that this story, the book has been translated into Japanese, and we're planning on doing a release and a push on that in the near future. So I've had Japanese nationals read the book both in English and Japanese, and one guy read it 3 times, front to back. Another guy read the full 640 pages in one sitting, and the response of the Japanese nationals has been nearly identical to Americans. And on Amazon, Wounded Tiger is getting, I think, an 87% five-star review rating, which is kind of unheard of. But people can find out more about the book at woundedtiger.com, of course, and Amazon.
Well, what has been the response to your book, especially from veterans?
Oh, well, people who have been in the war, they said, like you have said, I didn't know these things before. It really helped me understand these things. And there are even people who are consider themselves war buffs of the Pacific War said, Martin, I thought I really understood these things, but I realized that I didn't understand what was going on behind closed doors. It really did flesh out the picture for me.
Yeah, I can see that because you're one of the rare few that bring us the story from the other side.
Hmm.
And I've talked to people who have been in war, who have been on the other side, and to hear them tell their stories because when nations fight one another, it really becomes one-sided based on what nation you're in.
Correct.
And
Yeah, you hear all the your own propaganda and you start believing your own propaganda. But I worked in a federal prison for 7 years, Ward, and one verse that went through my head over and over was, "Man looks on outward appearance, God looks on the heart." And I thought, if that's what God does, that's what I want to do with these inmates. And I got to see them as men. And honestly, I saw a lot of them, or most of them, as just boys without a dad. They were just lost children. But when I worked on Wounded Tiger and the story of Fuchida and the Japanese people, again, I wanted to say, okay, what was really going on in their hearts? They wanted to be seen as a great nation. That's what they wanted. And I think the Japanese people can be a great nation, but greatness is not by conquering people, it's by serving others. That's what makes greatness, and that's what Jesus did. And that's what I want to do in doing this story, is to serve others with an inspiring story that encourages them that God has good things for you.
you know, when you were with the part of the story of talking about all of the Japanese missions and even the American missions, but with the Japanese, and I love the maps in the book. You even have a map of Pearl Harbor. They already knew where every ship was anchored in that harbor.
Yes, they
I
did. They
thought
had,
back in
yeah.
the 40s, that to me, that was scary.
Yes, they had spies in Pearl Harbor who were telephoning all the information back to Japan. So after Pearl Harbor, they had what's called the exclusionary zone of the west coast of the U.S., where they said all Japanese nationals have to be moved inland. And people said this was a terrible thing, and in many ways it was, because the good people were being separated along with the bad people. But the problem with the U.S. government was, we don't know who's who here. Some of these people could sabotage the power supply, poison the water, demolish military arrangements and bases. That, I mean, we don't know. They were just ignorant. So yeah, unfortunately, it's kind of like having a classroom of children where one guy is lighting matches and everybody has to go to detention hall for that one person. So in one sense, it was very sad, but in the other sense, I don't really know what else the U.S. could have done. Very
Yeah.
difficult
One of the
situation.
scariest parts in the book, and it's only a couple of lines, And I sat there and I really had to think about it. Where with Japan, they were looking at Midway, they were looking at Hawaii, because those are basically, you're jumping across the Pacific. You're trying to shorten your refueling, and then after Hawaii would have been America, would have been California. But you have a couple of lines in your book that really brought to light, what if it was the reversal? What if Japan was the one that had the bomb and hit Los Angeles and San Francisco? And I sat there and thought, that's not a far-fetched idea.
Well,
And
today it's
what's
not
scary,
far-fetched at all.
yeah, even today, that's doable,
Absolutely.
But I think out of all three, between Jake and then Fujita and Peggy, man, I love Jake's story.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's got a sly sense of humor too that kind of lightens things up. I mean, this guy is a funny guy, and he's a simple guy, but his story is quite powerful
Yeah,
and super.
and I'm not going to give anything away, but I know when there's that one area where um, he started praying, and it reminded me, like you had said back in the beginning, where his mother woke up, like, I need to pray for Jake. I feel like I'm falling.
Right.
He had this. He had the same type of feeling. We'll call it that, or same type of nudging that the
Uh-huh.
Holy Spirit gives. And the greatest thing about your book is when people take time to read it, they're going to learn so much. But when it comes to the Lord's way, he talks to everyone. And what I love, it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what your emotions or feelings are about someone else. God can break through all of that junk and show you his son.
Hmm. Yeah. Everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. Everyone who knocks, the door is open. So Fujita didn't really know what he was seeking. He just knew there's something good out there, and I'm going to find it, and he did. And then he spent the rest of his life telling the world about what God had done for him. I mean, thousands of times. And I've had many emails and letters from people saying, "Hey, I heard him speak at my church when I was 12 years old. I remember him. He spoke all over Europe." So he was the real deal. And I can't wait to get the movie going. So that might be another interview if you ever want to do it, talk about the movie side.
Oh, what? Oh, when you do the movie, oh, we're gonna talk. But I have to ask, because with you had talked to Fujita's daughter.
Yes,
Did
Miyako.
she ever meet Jake?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think she, well, I don't know. I've never asked her, but I don't think so. I don't think she ever met Jake DeShazer.
But you know what? Even though there's three main people in this story, the way that you bring this story till it when it all interconnects is, I love the story of Jake's guard.
Oh, yeah, that's
That
absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And when I found this picture that is in the back of the book, I was floored. I thought, you got to be kidding me. This is, now we can say, this is not a fairy tale. This is the real deal. And had his name was handwritten on the back of the photograph. I thought, oh, wow, got to use this.
Well,
Mhm.
when Jake, when the war was over and everybody went their own separate ways, went home or whatever, but for Jake to recognize the guard a few years down the road, that is only a God thing.
Was supernatural.
So, what do you hope your readers take away from reading Wounded Tiger?
Well, there's a lot of takeaways. I open with a verse saying that, are we not all children of the same God? Are we not all have the same Father? And it's the commonality of mankind, that we all are brothers, and we should stop seeing each other as so different and from ourselves. And like I said, when I worked in a federal prison, you see these scary guys, muscular tattoos. They just look scary, But after you get to know them, it's like, well, they're just like everybody else. And so I think that I would like people to recognize others as being less different than ourselves, and to do, as Jesus said, to treat others the way we want to be treated. The world would be certainly a better place if we did that.
Indeed. And all I can say is the one paragraph of Fujita remembering the face and the words of Peggy's father is literally, to me, worth the price of admission to
Well,
have a
we're not
copy
going
of
to
Wounded Tiger.
spoil it, but I'll tell you, when I read what Fujita's question was about the Hopevale incident, I thought, when I was first researching, I thought, well, that's an impossible question. It's impossible to get that answer. Why would you even ask that question? And later, when I see the answer, I thought, oh, wow, that is legit. And I'm like, I'm with you. I thought, okay, I believe that's 100% legit. I mean, it couldn't be any other way.
And
Listen,
so you actually, okay, well, you're proving it. So with every story that you came across researching all of their lives, you
mhm.
were double checking and triple checking to make sure that these facts were
Yeah,
absolutely real, because some of them sounded out of left field, didn't it?
oh, absolutely. And in fact, in the back of the book, you'll see where I talk about the Hopevale incident. There's a 2-page thing. And someone wrote me and said, Martin, I was wondering, how in the world can you tell this story? How did you get this information? Because it seems like it's not possible. When I read that, I realized, okay, this guy did his homework. This is a military document. Okay, I'm in. He said, you predicted my question and answered it in the book. So, yes, I did a ton of research, and to be honest, over the years, I've had a good number of people challenge me very harshly. That's not possible. How do you know that? And I thought, okay, lick my finger, go through the books and research and figure it all out. But like I said at the beginning of the introduction, it says the essence of every scene in this story is true, and that is the fact of the matter.
It is. And again, where can all of my viewers and listeners find your book and even connect with you online?
Yeah, you can connect with me at woundedtiger.com. There's information there, of course, social media, Facebook, there's Wounded Tiger Story. Of course, the book is on Amazon, and I encourage you to read the reviews as well. Don't take my word for it. I'm the author. You can take Ward's word for it, because I think you know him and trust him. But I've had dozens of people say this was the best story they'd ever read in their life. Is it the best story ever written out of the plan? I don't think so. I don't know. But I think you might find it very, very interesting. You can also read the first chapters free on woundedtiger.com.
Now, also, I wanted to ask you, what is fireseekers.com?
Fire Seekers is for the person who says, okay, I see what happened in Fuchida's life and DeShazer's life. I haven't killed people, I haven't been tortured, but some terrible things had happened in my life. I wonder if God could help me too. And what we want to say is, well, why don't you go through these steps and check out some of these avenues? And we would just want to encourage people that, you know what, those guys are gone, but you're here and now, and God's here and now. He will help you. He'll show you. As I say, everyone who seeks finds, and that's not my promise. That's a promise from Jesus Christ.
Amen to that. And ladies and gentlemen, Wounded Tiger is the inspiring true story of the pilot who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, whose life was changed by an American prisoner and by a girl he never met. Again, this is a true story, maybe about 3 people, but more importantly, it's about tragedy, triumph, and transformation. I'm going to recut that. Hold on a second. I want to do an edit point because I don't want to mess that up. All right. This true. Hold on one second. Here we go. Now, this true story may be about 3 people, but more importantly, it's about tragedy, triumph, and transformation. T. Martin Bennett's novel is a must read. It's compelling, it's historical, but it shows us that regardless where your heart is at the moment, maybe filled with hate or revenge or sadness, it's not too far for the Lord to reach and transform you. You just got to open up your heart and just by faith receive that Jesus is the Son of God, and he will lead you to that redemption. And just head over to woundedtiger.com And for more information, Wounded Tiger is also available on Amazon.com. And like Martin said, read the reviews. Hey, take it from me. I've read the book from cover to cover. It is one of the most compelling stories you will ever read, and it shows that the Lord can transform people no matter where they're at, regardless what part of the planet you live on or what you have done in your past. The Lord is there to change you. Just be open to what He is ready to give to you when you do receive Him. Martin, I want to thank you so much for coming on, sharing your incredible novel, and just the story of redemption.
Well, thanks for having me. Maybe when we're working on the film, you can have me on again, and we'll give people an update of what's going on. So I can't wait to do this. I have a friend who read the book 7 times, front to back. He said, Martin, I'm buying the first ticket. I'm going to be sitting in the front row with my popcorn and my Coca-Cola. I cannot wait to see this film. So it's in my head. It's in my mind. I want to do it. And I know you're a movie guy, so maybe we can do it again. I'd love to.
Oh, we will do it again. You have an open invitation to come back. And I know that not only is this book one of the best books I've ever read, because I only read nonfiction. I love true story. I love facts. But I cannot wait to see this in every theater across the world. I mean, this is the type of story that gets nominated for Best Picture.
I've actually heard that from a Oscar-winning producer. Told me those very words. He said,
Well,
"Martin, I'll tell you right now, this is the kind of film that gets Oscars."
well, you know what? I'm going to stand in agreement with you as well as that film producer because I can see it actually happening. And ladies and gentlemen, everyone who seeks finds. And it is my hope that you find a Wounded Tiger an inspiration to you, that all things are possible. So for everyone watching and listening, hey, I'll see you next time.